Welcome again, dear students. I'm Dr. Kaleem Ahmed, Assistant Professor, Department of Wildlife Sciences, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. In today's lecture, uh, we will discuss some threats to the biodiversity. As I have already discussed with you in the previous lecture, actually biodiversity is an intricate web of the life on Earth, encompassing the variety of the ecosystem, species as well as genetic diversity. So we can say it is the some kind of the foundation of the ecosystem functioning that actually providing essential services upon which human society is actually totally dependent. However, we can say this rich tapestry of life faces an unprecedented crisis, with species disappearing at an alarming rate. This comprehensive explorations actually delves into a multifaceted threats to biodiversity, ranging from natural phenomena to anthropogenic activities. So, understanding these threats is crucial for devising effective strategies to mitigate biodiversity loss and preserve the ecological balance of our planet. Now, in today's lecture, we will discuss the things under the following heads. We will discuss natural threats to biodiversity. We will discuss anthropogenic threats to biodiversity. We will discuss impacts of the biodiversity loss, and we will discuss the solution to biodiversity loss. And then in the last, we will try to conclude the things. Before starting this lecture, I will give you one example in which we can say that even a very common species may extinct, and we can face the crisis of the biodiversity conservation for this, because nowadays people think that the species which are very common are actually not facing some kind of the threats, and they are not considered to be we don't need to talk about that particular species. But in this particular example, we will find out if proper management and conservation initiatives are not going to be taken for the common species, then that particular species also actually at the risk of the extinctions. And this one classical example is the passenger pigeon. And this particular species was very common once a times, and people would say that the sky would actually darken when the birds fly in the sky, this particular passenger pigeon, because there are so many bird species. And they also people believed, and people actually say that the sun would be blocked out of these passenger pigeons when they actually fly in the sky. That's actually flock were huge, around some people's actually say that around 1 mile bird flock and about 1.6 kilometers, that a massive flock size that one can see at that particular time of the period of the passenger pigeons. And population was also estimated at that period of time around 5 million birds, at a huge number. And what actually we find that in the span of actually around 100 years, they are actually wiped out by the massive hunting and target nest collections. So what was happened that in 1914 this bird was extinct. So from this example, we have seen that even a very common bird species do face a risk of extinctions. That is why we are concerned about biodiversity conservations and threats to the biodiversity in the present scenarios. Let's start from we can say some natural threats to the biodiversity. Throughout I can say Earth history, certain geological events such as volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, asteroids, actually impacts have caused mass extinctions, thus actually reshaping the planet biodiversity. While these events are natural occurrence, their consequences for the biodiversity can be catastrophic. For example, you can say in the Cretaceous period, the event that occurred approximately 66 million years ago led to the extinction of the dinosaurs and many other species. While such events we can say are rare, they highlight the vulnerability of the we can say life on Earth to the natural disruptions. Another we can say habitat destructions. Habitat destruction is the most significant threat nowadays we can say to the biodiversity worldwide. human activities such as deforestation, urbanization, conversion of the natural ecosystem for agriculture and infrastructure developments result in the loss, fragmentation and degradation of the habitats. Forests, wetlands, grasslands and other vital ecosystems actually cleared at alarming rates, displacing countless species and pushing them towards extinctions. For example, the Amazon rainforest, often referred as the lungs of the earth, is under immense pressure from the deforestations for cattle ranching, agriculture and logging, jeopardizing actually its biodiversity and contributing to climate change. Another we can say is our exploitation. The unsustainable exploitation of natural resources poses a grave threat to biodiversity. Overfishing, poaching, illegal logging, hunting decimates population of the species, driving many to the brink of the extinction. Some of the iconic species such as elephant, rhinoceros and tiger are targeted for their tusks, horns, pelts, fueling some kind of the lucrative illegal wildlife trade. Similarly, we can say in marine ecosystem, overfishing and destructive fishing practices deplete marine resources, leading to the collapse of the fisheries and the disruption of the marine ecosystem. The extinction of the species, we can say, due to our exploitation, not only undermine biodiversity but also disrupt ecosystem and functioning and resilience. Another is pollution. We can say pollution from industrial, agriculture and domestic sources contaminates air, water and soil, posing a significant threat to the biodiversity. Chemical pollutants such as pesticides, heavy metals and plastics accumulates in ecosystems, poisoning organisms and disrupting ecological process. Agriculture, we can say runoff containing nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizers leads to eutrophication of water bodies, causing algal blooms and hypoxic dead zones blank of marine life. And another is plastic pollution also, we can say particularly in the oceans, poses a grave threat to marine biodiversity, with millions of the marine animals dying each year from ingestion or entanglement in plastic debris. Another we can say is invasive species, the introduction of we can say non-native species into a new environment, either we can say intentionally or unintentionally, have a devastating effects on native biodiversity. Invasive species often outcompete native species for resources, prey on native organisms and spread disease, leading to population decline and extinction. Some examples include the can toad in Australia, which was wrecked native wildlife since its introduction in the 1930s, and the zebra mussel in North America, which was disrupted freshwater ecosystem since its accidental introduction in the 1980s, and the catfish in India badly impact the local species of Indian wetlands. The globalization of trade and transportation facilities, the spread of invasive species intensifying their impacts on biodiversity worldwide. Another is climate change. Climate change actually primarily driven by the human activities poses multifaceted threats to biodiversity. We can say rising temperature, changing precipitations patterns and increasing frequency of the extreme weather events alter habitat, disrupt ecosystem and shift species distributions. Arctic ecosystems we can say are particularly vulnerable to climate change, with rapidly melting sea ice and permafrost threatening iconic species such as polar bear and the Arctic foxes. And in mountain ecosystem also face similar challenge, as rising temperature force species to higher elevations where we can say suitable habitats may be scarce. Additionally, we can say climate change worsens other threats to biodiversity such as habitat destruction and invasive species, further actually compounding the challenge faced by ecosystem and the species worldwide. this is one example in which we can find out that the other way that actually the climate change affect the species, and this is examples comes is the mismatch between the timing of the reproduction and timing of when the prey actually comes out for one particular species. Here I will give you the example of one bird species, that is pied flycatchers. As you can see in this particular picture, that pied flycatchers arrive from migrations from here and lays its eggs here at these times, and then nestlings come out when the abundance of the caterpillar is highest at this particular time of the years. And so it's we can say it's time of breeding such as in such a way that when the abundance of caterpillars is more, so that they can easily feed its nestlings. But what happened due to climate change is that because it's getting warmer earlier and abundance of the caterpillar is highest at this time when the species actually just lay their eggs. And as flycatchers, we can say uses day length to determine when to migrate, and the insect use temperature to determine when to come out. And now because of this climate change, there is a mismatch, we can say, between the time at which this birds breeds and the time at which the insects actually emerge. So basically this resulting in a poorer reproductive success for this particular species. So this is, we can say, how the we can say there is some hidden effects of the climate change and the bird species, and ultimately because of this mismatch of the breeding season and the abundance of the insects, we can find out how the species actually goes towards the extinction. So in this way we will also lost our biodiversity. So this is one other way we can actually think about how do we actually losing the species due to climate change. Then ecosystem disruptions. The loss of, we can say, biodiversity has profound consequences for the ecosystems, human societies and the planet as a whole. Biodiversity actually loss destabilize ecosystems, reducing their resilience to environmental change and increasing the risk of ecosystem collapse. Ecosystem services, we can say, such as pollination, nutricycling and water purifications provided by diverse biological communities are compromised, undermining human well-being and livelihood. For example, the decline of the pollinators such as bees and butterflies threaten agriculture productivity and food security, as many crops dependent on insect pollination for reproduction. So these are the things that how we are actually losing the biodiversity in this way. Then economic cost of the biodiversity loss. Biodiversity loss actually carries significant economic costs, affecting industries dependent on ecosystem services such as agriculture, fisheries, forestry and tourism. The decline of, we can say, fish stock due to overfishing, for example, not only undermines marine biodiversity but also jeopardizes the livelihood of the millions of the people who are dependent on fisheries for income and food security. Similarly, we can say that our deforestation and habitat destruction lead to the loss of valuable ecosystem services such as carbon sequestrations, water regulations and soil fertility, with far-reaching economic implications. Impacts of biodiversity loss, we can say, threats to global food security of this biodiversity loss. Biodiversity loss pose a threat to global food security by reducing the resilience of the agriculture systems to pests, disease and environmental stressors. We can say the monoculture agriculture, characterized by the cultivation of the single crop over large areas, is particularly vulnerable to pest outbreaks and crop failures. These actually reduce the genetic diversity in crops and livestock increase the vulnerability of the food production systems to climate change and other threats, risking the availability of the nutritious food for growing population. And ecological approaches that actually connect biodiversity to enhance ecosystem resilience and the productivity offer promising solution to address food security challenge while preserving biodiversity also. And what is the impact of the biodiversity loss on culture, traditional ecological knowledge? As indigenous peoples and local communities dependent on biodiversity for cultural identity, traditional knowledge and livelihood, so the loss of the biodiversity weakens cultural practices, erodes traditional knowledge systems and threatens the survival of the indigenous cultures and language. Traditional ecological knowledge passed on through generations provide valuable insight into the sustainable management of the natural resources and the conservation of the biodiversity. So we can say preserving and respecting indigenous rights and knowledge system is essential for effective biodiversity conservation and sustainable development. So another we can say biodiversity loss and climate change are actually interconnected process that can reinforce each other through some kind of the we can say feedback loops. For example, we can say deforestation reduces carbon sequestrations that actually contributing to climate change, which we can say in turn worsen biodiversity loss through habitat destructions and other mechanisms. So we can say these feedbacks between biodiversity loss and climate change amplify the challenge faced by the ecosystem and the species, making it increasingly difficult in addressing both issues. So, what are the solutions? How we can address the biodiversity loss? Addressing, we can say, biodiversity loss requires some kind of multifaceted approach that combines conservation, sustainable development, and global cooperations. So, the number of the ways by which we can do it. One is protected area establishment, establishing and effectively we can say managing the protected areas such as national park, wildlife sanctuaries, conservation reserves, community reserves, biosphere reserves that I already talked about you in the previous lectures is essential for the conservation of the biodiversity and safeguarding critical habitat for the endangered species or the species which are facing the threats due to many reasons. Another is we can say by promoting sustainable land use practices such as agroforestry, organic farming and sustainable forestry can help mitigate habitat destruction, reduce pollution and maintain ecosystem services while also supporting livelihood and economic development. Another we can say by educating the public about the importance of the biodiversity conservation and promoting sustainable lifestyle can foster a culture of the environmental stewardships and empower individual to take action to protect the nature. Another is we can say legal framework and the enforcements. We can say by strengthening legal framework for biodiversity conservation and enforcing regulation against activities that actually harm biodiversity such as illegal poaching, illegal logging, habitat destructions is crucial for achieving effective conservation outcomes. Another we can say collaboration among government organizations and stakeholders at the global level is also very essential for addressing transboundary threats to biodiversity such as climate change, habitat destruction and illegal wildlife trade. So these transboundary threats, here I use this term transboundary threats because the boundaries are for the human beings and species actually cross, species don't limit to themselves in one particular area. They cross the boundaries irrespective whether the boundaries belongs to which country. So it's very, very important to conserve a particular species, that we need international cooperations for the species which face threats in one particular environments, and it's actually maybe some countries is protecting some species in its country, but when the species cross to another area, another nations, in that particular area, they are not actually conserving that particular species. So that's why this transboundary threats has nowadays has been emphasized. So we need, so all the nations, that's why there are a lot of, we can say, different conservation organization, international conservation organization. The CITES is one of that, in which the many countries are signatory of that. They actually promise that we will conserve all the species which are actually facing some kind of the threats. So we can say biodiversity loss poses one of the most significant challenges of the 21st century, with far-reaching implication for the ecosystems, human societies, and the planet's futures. So we can say addressing this crisis require urgent action to address its root causes, including habitat destruction, our exploitation, pollution, invasive species, and climate change. By, we can say, implementing conservation measures, promoting sustainable development, and fostering international cooperation, we can work towards a more sustainable future where biodiversity thrives, benefiting both current as well as the future generation. So with this, we end to the lecture. Thank you, dear students.